My name is Akina, and just 1 hour before my sister-in-law's wedding, I began to go into labour. My mother-in-law, Doris, confiscated my cell phone, sealed me inside the bathroom, and instructed me to restrain my bodily functions so as not to spoil the bride's momentous occasion. Several hours later, I awoke in the intensive care unit. Doris was by my side, imploring me not to press charges. She was utterly unaware that her son, my husband, was on the cusp of dismantling her entire reality with a secret she had never fathomed. Before I delve further into this narrative, would you kindly share your viewing location in the comments below? Please indicate your approval and subscribe if you have ever experienced underestimation from your own family. You will be eager to discover the unfolding events. The Henderson estate in Buckhead was less a residence that morning and more a high-stakes cinematic production. It was 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and the humid Atlanta atmosphere was saturated with the fragrance of countless imported white roses and the frenetic strains of a string quartet tuning up. This occasion marked the wedding of the year for Atlanta's affluent black community, and my mother-in-law, Doris Henderson, presided over it as its imperious orchestrator. Doris, a woman who revered social standing as if it were a sacred doctrine, was meticulously ensuring that every detail was perfect. This was not merely a wedding, it represented a significant alliance. My sister-in-law, Chloe, who was 28 years old, was set to marry into the influential Thornton political lineage. Chloe, a lifestyle influencer with a Caucasian background who had cultivated a career by appearing perpetually on the verge of stress in picturesque settings, was currently embodying the role of a full-blown bridezilla, clutching a mimosa, while admonishing a floral designer regarding the precise hue of a peony. I am Akina, 32 years of age and 8.5 months pregnant, and I was simply attempting to be helpful. My husband, Marcus, Doris's son, was occupied with the groomsmen, leaving me to navigate the surrounding pandemonium independently. As a marketing director for a burgeoning medtech startup, my professional life revolved around organizing chaos, so this situation felt quite familiar. I observed one of the young servers appearing overwhelmed, beginning to place the seating cards at the incorrect reception tables. I proceeded cautiously towards him, my hand resting on my enlarged abdomen. The infant was exerting pressure against my ribcage, making respiration challenging, but I was determined to offer assistance. I quietly said, "Hello, I believe those are intended for the principal family table, the one situated near the orchestra." The server's face registered immense relief. "Thank you, Ma'am. Mrs. Henderson had explicitly stated she would terminate my employment if I made even a single error." Before I could even return his smile, Chloe entered, her silken robe trailing behind her. "McKenna, oh my goodness, what are you doing?" Her voice was sharp enough to shatter glass. "You are disorganizing the staff. They have their directives. He is fully capable of managing." The server winced and quickly withdrew, appearing somewhat bewildered. Chloe interjected, "You were simply impeding their work." She cut me off, her gaze scanning my unadorned maternity attire. "Honestly, could you please just find a seat somewhere? That entire situation," she gestured vaguely towards my physical form, "is complicating the photographer's desired angles. You appear fatigued. You are detracting from the ambiance." Doris materialized instantly, her diamond-encrusted rings glinting as she waved her hand dismissively. "Chloe is precisely correct, McKenna." Her voice, while smooth, carried the unyielding sharpness of polished steel. "You should retire to the library to rest. I simply cannot countenance your appearing pallid in the family portraits. The Thorntons will arrive momentarily, and we must project an impeccable image this evening." She emphasized the word perfect, as if it were a mandatory stipulation, which in her milieu it was. I will not permit them to perceive this family as incapable of orchestrating an event of this magnitude. This alliance, this wedding, is of paramount importance. She then turned her attention to Chloe, her entire demeanour softening into saccharine adoration. My dear, you go and complete your makeup. The photographer wishes to capture your bridal portraits by the fountain. Mama will manage this. Chloe bestowed upon me one final triumphant smirk before gracefully departing, leaving me alone with my mother-in-law. I attempted to maintain my composure, despite experiencing a familiar sensation of profound exhaustion. I was endeavouring to assist Doris. The name cards were demonstrably incorrect. Doris emitted a sigh, a sound indicative of profound impatience, as if I were a child who had spilled juice on her pristine carpet. Mother dear, she stated, drawing nearer, your contribution is to remain still. Your contribution is to refrain from obstructing. Frankly, you appear utterly dishevelled in that garment. She scrutinized my simple, elegant maternity dress with open disdain. I instructed you to don the navy blue silk. It was considerably more appropriate. That beige hue completely washes you out. Now please proceed to the library. Do not compel me to repeat myself. Just then, my husband Marcus entered the foyer, already attired in his tuxedo. As a distinguished cardiothoracic surgeon, he consistently presented a polished appearance, yet I detected the familiar tension around his eyes. He had evidently overheard the latter part of his mother's directive. "Mom, please," he said, his voice attempting an authoritative tone, but sounding more like weary supplication. "She is merely trying to be helpful. She has been a tremendous support all week." He offered me a swift, strained smile, one I recognized instantly. It was his "please just go along with it" smile. "And I think you look beautiful, Keena. That dress is perfect." Doris did not even bother to turn and acknowledge her son. She merely elevated a flawlessly sculpted eyebrow, addressing his reflection in a grand, gilt-edged mirror adorning the wall. "Marcus, do not provoke my displeasure today, not on this day above all others. I have informed you that I am managing this situation, and I have already stated that Mekana should not exert herself unduly." She finally redirected her cold, appraising gaze back to me, entirely disregarding her son. "Or perhaps you have forgotten the Thornton Gala last year. Have you forgotten the repercussions of that event?" I flinched as if physically assaulted. How could I possibly forget? The mortification of that evening still resided within me as a chilling knot. Doris continued, her voice escalating slightly, ensuring that nearby staff could overhear. "McKenna, you inadvertently spilled an entire tray of vintage champagne directly onto Senator Thornton's wife. Red champagne upon a white designer gown. I dedicated months to rectifying that relationship. We simply cannot afford another one of your clumsy missteps. Today, Makar, not with Chloe's future at stake. Everything must be flawless." My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my fingernails digging into my palms. I vividly recalled that night. I remembered every sickening particular. I had been transporting 2 glasses from the bar, navigating the crowded ballroom. Chloe, incensed that Senator Thornton had spent 20 minutes commending my recent article on medtech marketing, had deliberately extended her foot into my path. I stumbled and the champagne cascaded outwards. The entire assembly fell into silence. Doris had regarded me with unadulterated malevolence, yet the most agonizing part transpired later. I recollected Marcus pulling me into an alcove, his grip painfully constricting my arm. "Just apologize, Keena," he had hissed, his eyes darting about to ascertain if anyone was observing. "Don't create a spectacle. Simply express your regret. You are aware of Mum's reaction concerning the Thorntons." So I had. I had stood there utterly humiliated and offered profuse apologies to Chloe and Mrs. Thornton for my perceived clumsiness. I had assumed culpability for Chloe's malice, all to maintain equilibrium, all to shield Marcus from his own mother's fury. And here he was offering the same feeble, inconsequential defense. His words, "I think you look beautiful," were not a defense at all. They were merely another method of conveying, "Please, Makar, just comply with her wishes so that my life may be less complicated." I complied with the instruction. I proceeded to the library and occupied a rigid antique chair for close to an hour, listening to the muted sounds of the string quartet rehearsing outdoors and the escalating pitch of Chloe's laughter emanating from the bridal suite down the corridor. Eventually, I could no longer remain quiescent. I required the use of a lavatory and wished to avoid the primary hallway, which was now thronged with arriving guests. I slipped out the library's side entrance and made my way to the small guest bathroom discreetly situated beneath the grand staircase. It was 1 o'clock, precisely 1 hour prior to the ceremony's scheduled commencement. I was washing my hands, gazing at my weary reflection in the ornate mirror, when the initial sensation struck. It was not a contraction. It was a sharp, agonizing cramp deep in my lower back, so intense that it made my knees buckle. I grasped the cold marble sink, my breath catching in my throat. I attempted to stand upright, telling myself it was merely a normal ache from carrying such a considerable weight. However, as I did, a second, more violent spasm seized me, and then I felt it. A sudden, unmistakable gush of warm fluid coursing down my legs, saturating my dress and pooling on the immaculate white floor tiles. I looked down in absolute terror. It was impossible. It was too soon. My due date was 6 weeks away. "No," I whispered to my reflection, my heart pounding against my ribs. "No, not now. Please, not now." As if in response, the first genuine contraction ripped through my abdomen. It bore no resemblance to the gentle Braxton Hicks contractions I had experienced. This was an incandescent, all-consuming pain that stole my breath and sent a wave of dizziness through me. I collapsed against the wall, my hand instinctively flying to my stomach, which was now as hard as stone. Panic, cold and piercing, flooded my system. This was real. The baby was coming. Now I had to locate Marcus. I had to reach a medical facility. I pushed the bathroom door open, my entire body trembling. The hallway was deserted. The music from the garden was more audible here, a cheerful, mocking melody. I had to find Marcus. He was a physician. He would know what to do. He would transport me to the hospital. I moved down the hall, one hand clutching my abdomen as another contraction began to intensify. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I peered into the chaotic main hall, but he was not there. I observed Chloe posing for a photograph, laughing. I saw my father-in-law conversing with Senator Thornton, but no Marcus. My gaze darted towards the bridal dressing room, a spacious suite just off the main hall. The door was slightly ajar. Perhaps Marcus was inside. I pushed the door open, breathless. Marcus! But it was not my husband, it was Doris. She stood alone in the center of the room, which was adorned with towering displays of gifts meticulously wrapped in silver and white. She was critically surveying the gift table, adjusting a substantial Tiffany box slightly to the left. She had not heard me. "Mother!" I gasped, leaning heavily against the ornate doorframe. The pain was acute now, stealing my breath. Doris turned her face, a mask of social irritation clearly perturbed by the interruption. "Maka, I instructed you to. I believe I am going into labor." I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "My water has broken." I pointed downwards at the dark, spreading stain on my beige dress, my voice fracturing with panic.
I'm experiencing contractions. It's happening now. I observed her expression. The socialite smile evaporated. For a fleeting moment, I detected genuine astonishment. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open, but just as swiftly the shock dissipated, replaced by an emotion I had never before witnessed directed towards me. It was pure, cold, reptilian fury. Her eyes narrowed, her perfectly painted lips pressing into a thin, furious line. She took a step towards me, her voice low and menacing. No. I blinked, bewildered by the single word. No? What do you mean, no? I need to go to the hospital. I need to call Marcus. Doris shook her head, a small, tight motion. No, not now. She hissed, her eyes darting towards the hallway as if to confirm no one was listening. You will not do this. You will not spoil your sister-in-law's wedding. Her words were so devoid of warmth, so utterly devoid of humanity, that I struggled to comprehend them. I fumbled in the pocket of my maternity dress, my fingers desperately searching for my phone. I have to call Marcus, I stammered, pulling it out. He's a doctor, he'll know. Before I could even unlock the screen, Doris's hand shot out like a viper. She snatched the phone from my grasp, her grip so firm that her knuckles turned white.
Her eyes blazed. You will not, she seethed, ruin Chloe's day. Do you have any conception of what this wedding signifies? The Thorntons have expended $1 million on this event. This concerns our family's future, our standing. This is not about your minor inconvenience. Inconvenience? I gasped as another contraction, sharper this time, radiated from my back and constricted my abdomen like a band of fire. I nearly buckled, grasping the gift table for support. The Tiffany box wobbled precariously. Mother, I pleaded, my voice breaking. This is not panic. I am in labor. I am having a baby right now. Doris did not even flinch at my distress. She simply pocketed my phone. Then you will hold it in. You are a strong woman, Makina. I have always affirmed that. You simply need to breathe deeply. Contemplate something else. Contemplate the family. Contemplate how utterly devastated Chloe would be if you transformed her perfect day into a medical spectacle. All those influential guests, the senator, it is simply unthinkable. The sheer audacity of her request, the absolute cruelty of it left me speechless. She was instructing me to suppress childbirth. As I struggled to find the words to counter her, another wave of pain crashed over me, forcing me to my knees. The frigid marble floor was a shock against my skin. Please, I begged, looking up at the woman who was my husband's mother, the prospective grandmother of my child. Please, I am not jesting. I am in genuine distress. Return my phone. I must contact a physician. I require Marcus. Doris's eyes darted around the room, settling on the substantial, solid oak door of the adjoining bathroom. This is what you will do, she stated, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper as if she were resolving a minor scheduling conflict. You will enter this bathroom. You will sit on the floor, breathe, and remain silent. You simply need to hold on for a few hours. That is all, just until after the ceremony and the principal photographs. I stared at her, incredulous, the agony of another contraction rendering me dizzy. Hold on, Mother. This is a baby. It is not a business meeting that you can reschedule. I require a hospital and you will arrange one. She snapped, her patience having evaporated. You will not usurp Chloe's spotlight. You will not transform this entire day into the Mina has a baby extravaganza. I forbid it. She seized my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep, and unceremoniously hauled me to my feet. I was taken aback by her strength, but I was so weakened by the pain and shock that I stumbled, barely able to remain upright. No, please, I implored, attempting to disengage, but my resistance was feeble. Enter, she commanded, roughly propelling me through the bathroom doorway. I fell against the vanity, my hip colliding with the marble edge. The room was sumptuously appointed, featuring gold fixtures and more marble, yet it felt like a solitary confinement cell. "Mother, you cannot," I cried out, turning back, but she was already pulling the door shut. "Doris, please do not do this." I lunged for the handle, but it was too late. I heard the unmistakable metallic click of a key turning in the lock from the exterior. My blood ran cold. It was not a simple push-button lock that I could disengage. She had employed a key. She had premeditated this. "Mother!" I screamed, pounding on the heavy wooden door with both fists. "Let me out! What are you doing? Let me out of here! I am in labor!" "Doris!" I could hear her footsteps receding, muffled. The door was substantial, soundproofed. "Help!" I shrieked again, rattling the handle ineffectually. "Someone help me! She has locked me in! She has locked me in!" I was trapped. My infant was arriving, and my mother-in-law had incarcerated me in a bathroom, leaving me to confront it entirely alone. I hammered on the door until my fists ached, my throat raw from screaming. The thick wood muffled everything, transforming my desperate cries into dull, heavy thuds. "Let me out, please! Someone, Marcus!" I yelled, rattling the locked handle repeatedly. Another contraction seized me, and I slid down the door, gasping, pressing my forehead against the cool wood. It was futile. No one could hear me. Then through the door I discerned the faint sound of the dressing room door opening once more, followed by my sister-in-law's voice. "Chloe, what was all that banging?" "Mom," she inquired. Her voice was sharp, irritated. "Is everything all right? Where did Makina go?" There was a pause. I held my breath, listening, fervently hoping Chloe would exhibit some semblance of decency. Then came Doris's voice, as smooth and composed as if she were discussing meteorological conditions. "Oh, it is nothing, darling. Just McKenna being excessively dramatic, as usual." She began feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the pregnancy. You know how she can be. I merely suggested she take a moment to relax and compose herself in the bathroom. She is perpetually attempting to make everything about her. A beat of silence, and then Chloe emitted a laugh. It was not a hearty laugh, merely a brief, dismissive, "Huh." It was a sound of complicity, of shared amusement. That laughter was a betrayal, almost as sharp as the turning of the key. She was aware. She knew I was confined in here, and she did not care. "Now cease worrying about her," Doris stated, her voice bright and conclusive. "You appear breathtaking. The Thorntons are awaiting. Your future is awaiting. Go, my dear. Go and get married." I heard the rustle of Chloe's gown as she presumably departed the room. I was once again alone. A few moments later, a new sound filtered through the walls, faint but unmistakable, the opening bars of Pachelbel's Canon in D, performed by a string quartet, the bridal processional music. The ceremony was commencing. They were walking down the aisle. They had, in fact, abandoned me here. I was ensnared in premature labor, while the family I had striven so hard to integrate into celebrated mere hundreds of feet away, entirely indifferent to my suffering. I was, in every conceivable sense of the word, forsaken. I lay upon the frigid Italian marble floor. For an indeterminate duration, I do not know. Time seemed to warp and elongate. The floor tiles were shockingly cold against my cheek, a stark contrast to the inferno raging through my abdomen. Outside, the world continued its course, oblivious to my plight. I could detect the faint, muffled sound of applause emanating from the garden, followed by the indistinct murmur of someone delivering a speech via a microphone. The ceremony had concluded. They were married. They were celebrating. Another contraction seized me, more powerful than the preceding one. I cried out, my voice sounding thin in the acoustically dead space of the bathroom. I timed it on the small wristwatch adorning my wrist. 7 minutes since the last one, no, closer to 5. They were occurring with increasing frequency. Help! I screamed again, hauling myself upright by the gilded sink faucet. Please, someone let me out. I pounded on the substantial oak door with the heels of my hands, but the sound was absorbed almost instantaneously. The music outside had shifted, transitioning from elegant classical strings to lively jazz. The festivities were beginning. My screams were merely ineffectual noises, swallowed by the celebration. I searched for any possible egress. The door handle refused to budge. The lock was robust. There was a window, a tall, narrow pane of frosted glass, situated high on the wall for privacy. I dragged a heavy velvet stool over and climbed onto it, my body trembling with effort and pain. I reached for the latch, but it was locked securely with a key that I did not possess. Even if I had managed to open it, it led only to a small, enclosed ventilation shaft. There was no escape. I was completely, utterly trapped. The baby was arriving, and I was alone, incarcerated in a bathroom, while my family laughed and imbibed champagne just beyond. Another contraction, a vice-like grip of agony, forced me back to the cold marble floor. I curled into a fetal position, panting, the scent of Chloe's expensive gardenia perfume hanging heavily in the air. As the pain subsided, a memory flooded my mind, sharp and humiliating. It was from a year prior, at a formal family dinner held right here in this very residence. I had just successfully secured the initial round of seed funding for my medtech startup. I was immensely proud. My company was developing an application designed to facilitate the coordination of care for individuals with chronic illnesses. A project conceived from observing my own grandmother's struggles with disorganized medical appointments. My hands trembled slightly as I laid out my business proposal for Doris and Marcus's father, hoping they'd grasp its potential and perhaps consider investing. While Marcus's father appeared thoughtful, Doris abruptly ended the discussion with a sharp, mirthless chuckle. Her voice, laced with disdain, still echoes in my mind. "Oh, Makina, how utterly charming," she'd remarked, her perfectly manicured fingernail tapping against her wine goblet. "Your little application, a delightful pastime." "It's not a hobby, Mother," I'd retorted, my face flushing. "It's a viable enterprise. We've already secured $500,000 in seed funding." "Please," she cut me off. "The Henderson family wealth is channeled into tangible assets. Real estate, blue chip securities, concrete investments. We don't squander our legacy on apps, the cloud, or whatever ephemeral pursuits you're dabbling in." She then turned to Marcus. "Darling, kindly pass the asparagus. McKenna's ventures are giving me a migraine." I looked to Marcus, my eyes conveying a desperate plea for him to speak up, to defend my work and acknowledge my passion. He merely cleared his throat, cast his gaze down at his plate, and picked up the asparagus serving dish. "More asparagus, Mum?" he'd inquired, as if my earlier statement had been entirely disregarded. His silence that evening felt like a profound betrayal, a small wound that I now understood was part of a much larger, deeper injury. He had never regarded my career as equivalent to his own, just as his mother had never viewed me as their equal. I attempted to banish the memory as another contraction intensified, forcing a low moan from my lips. I shifted uncomfortably, seeking a less agonizing position on the unforgiving floor. My cheek was pressed against the chilly tile. The image of Doris's face, contorted with disgust at the Thornton Gala, flashed before my eyes. That night, it wasn't merely Marcus's silence, it was Doris's immediate, calculated cruelty. The scene is remarkably clear to me now. I was navigating the crowded ballroom, juggling 2 glasses of champagne, attempting to rejoin Marcus and his parents. Chloe, who had been seething all evening because Senator Thornton had dedicated 20 minutes to commending a recent medical technology article I'd co-authored, was conversing with a group of friends. As I passed, she subtly extended her foot. It was a swift, almost imperceptible motion, perfectly timed. I stumbled, my feet becoming entangled. The champagne went airborne. It was a catastrophe. The crimson liquid arced through the air, drenching Mrs. Thornton's immaculate ivory silk gown. The music seemed to cease. All eyes turned to witness the spectacle. Mortified, I apologized profusely, grabbing napkins. Doris made no move to assist. She didn't inquire if I was all right. Instead, she strode over, her face a mask of icy fury. "What is the matter with you?" she hissed, her voice low yet piercing. "That is a vintage gown, McKenna. You are mortifying this family in front of the senator." She seized my arm and practically dragged me toward the powder room, leaving Marcus to stammer apologies to the Thorntons. Later, I attempted to explain to Marcus that I suspected Chloe had deliberately tripped me. He simply sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Kay, please," he'd said, "Chloe wouldn't do that. You were likely just nervous. Let it go. Mom is already furious." Doris had shielded Chloe's malevolence, reframing it as my own ineptitude. The truth was never the issue. It was always about preserving the family's image. And within that image, Chloe was flawless, while I was the liability, the outsider, the one perpetually creating a mess. I tried to rise from the floor, but a wave of dizziness caused the room to spin. The contractions were closer now, mere minutes apart. Then a new sensation, a sharp, tearing pain, distinct from the labor. It felt wrong. I looked down. Blood. There was blood on the white marble floor, vividly crimson and far too much. This was more than just labor. Something was gravely amiss. I knew it with a chilling certainty. A placental abruption. I'd read about it. The baby was in peril. I was in peril. All thoughts of dignity or maintaining peace vanished, replaced by raw, primal terror. "Help!" I cried out, pounding on the locked door with the heel of my shoe. "Please, someone, I'm bleeding, my baby." I could faintly hear the party outside, the thumping bass line of uptown funk vibrating through the walls. They were dancing, they were celebrating. My voice was lost against the joyful din. I was bleeding out, trapped in a bathroom while they danced. "Marcus!" I shrieked his name, a last desperate plea. "Marcus, please!" The pain was overwhelming, a tidal wave pulling me under. The edges of the room began to fade to grey. My limbs felt heavy, my body too weak to resist any longer. I slumped against the door, my blood-stained hand sliding down the smooth wood, leaving a crimson streak. My final conscious thought was of my son, my baby. I had tried to protect him and I had failed. Darkness finally claimed me, and the sounds of the party, the music, the laughter, dissolved into a blessed, terrifying silence. The reception was in full swing. The string quartet had been replaced by a 9-piece band playing Earth, Wind, and Fire. Champagne towers sparkled beneath the expansive tent, and hundreds of guests mingled on the immaculately manicured lawn. Marcus finally extricated himself from a conversation with one of Senator Thornton's aides, his duties as a groomsman officially fulfilled. He scanned the crowd for McKenna. A pang of guilt still lingered from that morning. He had witnessed his mother's cold dismissal of her, had seen McKenna's face fall when he offered only a weak defense. He told himself he would make it up to her. He would find her, get her a plate of food, and tell her how stunning she looked, even though she wasn't wearing the navy blue dress. But he couldn't spot her. He checked the main tables, the dance floor, the patio. Nowhere. A familiar flicker of irritation sparked in his chest. She was probably upset. She was likely back in their hotel room, angry that he hadn't stood up to his mother more forcefully. He loved his wife, he truly did, but her sensitivity concerning his family was occasionally exhausting. Couldn't she just let it go for one evening, for Chloe's wedding? He pulled out his phone, sighed, and dialed her number. He was already rehearsing the conversation. Keena, where are you? You can't just leave. Mum's just being mum. But the call didn't connect. It went straight to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Michaela. He frowned. That was odd. Her phone was never off. She was meticulous about keeping it charged, especially this late in her pregnancy. He tried again, straight to voicemail. A new, sharper sensation began to cut through his annoyance. Worry. Where was she? She wouldn't just leave without her phone. He walked back inside the main house, checking the library where his mother had instructed her to wait. The room was empty. He checked the kitchen, filled with busy caterers. He checked the upstairs guest rooms, all vacant. He stood in the grand foyer, the sounds of the party outside suddenly seeming distant and muffled. His wife was missing. He spotted them on the main lawn, holding court near the towering ice sculpture fountain. Doris and Chloe were with the Thornton family, all of them laughing at something Senator Thornton had said. They looked like a magazine spread, the epitome of powerful, influential families merging. Chloe, in her $50,000 gown, looked radiant. Doris appeared triumphant. Marcus strode across the grass, his anxiety overriding social decorum. He didn't wait for a pause in their conversation. Mom, he interrupted, his voice tight. Mom, where is McKenna? I can't find her anywhere. Doris's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance at being interrupted in front of her new, influential in-laws. She turned to him, placing a hand on his arm, a gesture of maternal concern that was purely for show. Marcus, darling, not now, she whispered, her voice strained. We're speaking with the senator. I don't care, he hissed back, his voice low. Her phone is off. She's not in the hotel. Where is she? Doris's expression hardened. She pulled him a few feet away from the group, her smile still plastered on for the Thorntons' benefit. Honestly, Marcus, your wife has the most dramatic timing. She approached me an hour ago, said she had a splitting headache from all the excitement. She was being quite difficult about it, frankly. What are you talking about? A headache? Yes, Doris said with an exasperated sigh. She said she was going back to the hotel to lie down. She just left in the middle of the reception. Can you imagine how rude? But you know McKenna. She's not built for this kind of social pressure. She just behaves like a child. Chloe drifted over, linking her arm with his, her champagne glass still in hand. She's right, Marcus. Don't worry about it, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. To be honest, I think she was just jealous of all the attention. She looked green all morning. She probably just went home to sulk. This is our day. Don't let her ruin it. Now come on. Dad Thornton wants a picture with his new son-in-law. Marcus looked from his sister's bright, unbothered face to his mother's dismissive one. Her story made a kind of sense. McKenna did dislike these events. She did get overwhelmed, but to leave without her phone, to leave without telling him, it felt wrong, deeply wrong. He tried to suppress his irritation, but the worry had settled into a cold, metallic taste in his mouth. He knew his wife. He knew her better than anyone. McKenna was meticulous. She was responsible, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. She would never just depart from a chaotic event, hail a cab, and turn off her phone without informing him. Even at the height of their worst arguments, she was communicative. She would send a text. She would leave a note. She would not simply vanish. His heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He retrieved his phone again, this time checking their joint credit card account. He had set up alerts for it. He scrolled through the recent charges. The florist, the band deposit, the final payment to the caterer, all expected. but there was no Uber charge, no Lyft charge, no charge from any local taxi service, so she hadn't taken a car. He surveyed the grand estate, the laughter and music from the reception tent suddenly sounding sinister. If she hadn't taken a car, then she was still here. But where? And why was her phone off? He glanced back at his mother and sister, now happily posing for photographs with the Thorntons, their laughter bright and effortless. A dark, ugly thought, a wisp of a suspicion he had never allowed himself to formulate, began to take shape in his mind. Then he remembered his father. His late father, a brilliant and pragmatic man, had always had a complex relationship with Doris. He loved her, but he was not blind to her obsessively controlling nature. Years ago, after a valuable painting had gone missing, only to be found in Chloe's dorm room, his father had taken him aside. He had led Marcus to his private study, a room Doris rarely entered, and showed him the discreet, state-of-the-art security system he'd had installed. It was separate from the main house alarm. The hard drive was hidden. The cameras were minuscule, integrated into the architecture of the primary rooms. "Your mother has a blind spot when it comes to appearances, Marcus," his father had said, his voice grim. "And she has a blind spot for Chloe. I trust you. You are the only one I trust to be level-headed if things ever go sideways. This is our insurance policy. Only you have this password." Marcus had never thought to use it, until now. He raced to his father's study, locking the door behind him. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely type the password. The secure server, Word to Life, displayed a grid of camera feeds from all over the estate. He clicked on the feed for the bridal dressing room. The room was empty now, a silent testament to the party outside. He grabbed the mouse and scrubbed the timeline back to just before the ceremony, around 10 o'clock in the evening. And there it was. He watched his blood turn to ice. He saw McKenna stumble into the room, her face pale, her hand on her stomach. He saw her plead with his mother. He watched, frozen in horror, as his own mother, Doris, snatched the phone from McKenna's hand. He saw her berate his wife. He saw McKenna double over in pain, and then he saw the unimaginable. He saw Doris grab McKenna by the arm, drag her and physically shove her into the ensuite bathroom. He saw his mother pull a key from her pocket, lock the door from the outside, and then calmly straighten her dress. He watched the timestamp as she left the room. He fast-forwarded. 1 hour passed, 2, 3. The party started outside. No one went to the door. The door remained closed. He fast-forwarded to the present. The door was still locked. She was still in there. He made no sound. The rage that filled him was so cold and absolute, it burned away all panic. He stood up, walked out of the study, and sprinted down the main hall. A server carrying a tray of champagne stepped into his path. Marcus didn't slow down. He shoved the man aside, sending glasses shattering across the floor. He didn't hear the crash. He didn't hear the gasps from the guests. He burst into the bridal suite, which was now devoid of people but littered with discarded gift bags. He ran to the locked bathroom door and kicked it. The wood splintered, but the lock held. He kicked it again, putting his entire weight into it. The frame shattered and the door flew open. She was on the floor, unconscious in a pool of blood, her skin a terrifyingly waxy grey. He forgot how to breathe. For 1 second, he was just a husband. Then the surgeon took over. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying, dialing 911. His voice was not a scream. It was a cold, terrifying command that cut through the sounds of the party outside. "This is Dr. Marcus Henderson. I need an ambulance at the Henderson estate in Buckhead immediately. I have a 34-week pregnant female. Unresponsive, severe blood loss, suspected placental abruption. She was found locked in a bathroom, pulseless." He knelt beside her, beginning compressions, his mind a whirlwind of medical protocols. He was about to follow the paramedics as they rushed her out, but he stopped. The evidence. He sprinted back to his father's study, his heart pounding. He jammed his personal USB drive into the server, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He copied the video file, the entire damning record. He ripped the drive out, shoved it deep into his pocket, and ran to save his wife. The ambulance bay doors at Northside Atlanta Hospital burst open. Paramedics rushed the gurney through, their movements swift and desperate. Marcus ran alongside them, still in his blood-stained tuxedo, his mind a roaring void of panic and medical terminology. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room were blinding, reflecting off the polished floors. 32-year-old female, G1P0, 34 weeks gestation, a paramedic shouted, rattling off her vitals. Found unresponsive, locked in a bathroom. Suspected placental abruption with severe hemorrhaging. BP is 80/40 and dropping. Fetal heart rate is intermittent. A team of doctors and nurses converged on the gurney, a flurry of blue scrubs. A sharp-faced woman with commanding eyes took charge. Her name tag read Dr. Imani. She shone a light into McKenna's unblinking eyes, her expression grim. "She's in hypovolemic shock," Dr. Imani ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get 2 large-bore IVs in her now. Type and cross-match for 6 units of O negative. We need to move now. This baby has to come out." "That's my wife," Marcus choked out, grabbing Dr. Imani's arm. "Makar, I'm a surgeon here. I'm Dr. Henderson." Dr. Imani looked at him, her gaze softening for just a fraction of a second before hardening again with professional resolve. "Dr. Henderson, your wife needs an emergency C-section this instant or we will lose them both. She has lost a critical amount of blood. We have no time." She turned and ran with the gurney as they pushed it toward the operating theaters. "Prepare all 3, she yelled. "Get pediatric anesthesiologists and NICU down here, stat!" Marcus ran with them, his mind screaming. This wasn't happening. This was the nightmare scenario every doctor, every husband dreaded. He saw the gurney slam through the double doors marked operating room authorized personnel only. He surged forward, his medical instincts overriding everything. "I'm coming in." A large surgical nurse physically blocked his path, planting a firm hand on his chest. "No, doctor, you can't. You're the husband. You know the protocol. You have to wait out here." "But I'm a surgeon," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "She's my wife." "Which is exactly why you can't be in there," the nurse said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Let them do their jobs. You need to let them work." The double doors swung shut with a pneumatic hiss, leaving him alone in the sterile, silent hallway. The adrenaline that had propelled him from the house, that had fueled his frantic run through the hospital, vanished, leaving him impossibly heavy. His legs gave out. He stumbled to the nearest row of hard plastic waiting room chairs and collapsed, his body folding in on itself. He dropped his head into his hands, the dried blood smear from McKenna's floor sticky on his skin. He had saved lives in this very hospital. He had held hearts in his hands, but he had never, ever felt this powerless. He sat there, a surgeon in a ruined tuxedo, as the woman he loved and his unborn child fought for their lives, all because his mother had wanted a perfect party. It felt like a lifetime had passed. The frantic energy of the emergency bay had given way to the agonizingly sterile quiet of the surgical waiting room, and now to the suffocating silence outside the NICU. Marcus sat hunched over, his elbows on his knees, his tuxedo trousers still stained with his wife's blood. He had refused to change. He couldn't move. He just stared at the double doors, praying for a sign. Every beep from the monitors inside felt like a hammer blow to his chest. He was a surgeon. He understood the language of these machines, and the frantic rhythms he'd heard earlier had terrified him. Finally, the doors hissed open and Dr. Imani stepped out. She looked exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled, her mask hanging limply around her neck. Marcus shot to his feet, his entire body trembling. "Are they? Is she?" Dr. Imani met his gaze directly, her eyes weary but compassionate. "Your wife is alive, Dr. Henderson. She is past the immediate crisis." Marcus nearly collapsed with relief, grabbing the back of a chair to steady himself. "Oh, thank God, and the baby." "McKenna is in surgical recovery," Dr. Imani continued, her tone measured, pulling him back from the edge of his relief. "She is stable, but I need you to understand how serious this was. She lost a critical amount of blood. We had to give her multiple transfusions. She is very, very weak and will require close monitoring in the ICU for at least the next 24 hours. Marcus nodded, his medical mind processing the words. "I understand. Thank you. And our son?" Dr. Imani's professional mask wavered for a moment. She took a small breath. "You have a son, but Marcus, he's in critical condition. The placental abruption was severe. He was deprived of oxygen for a significant period before your 911 call. He suffered severe asphyxia." The medical term hit Marcus harder than any physical blow. Severe asphyxia, he knew what that meant. Brain damage, long-term complications if he survived at all. "We are doing everything we can," Dr. Imani said gently, seeing the devastation on his face. "We have him on a cooling protocol to try and mitigate any brain injury. And he's on a ventilator. He is a fighter, Marcus. He is already fighting. But the next 48 hours are critical." Marcus leaned his head against the wall, the world tilting. His mother had done this. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. As if sensing his thoughts, Dr. Imani offered an additional detail. "There's something else pertinent you need to be aware of. Detective Hayes, a representative of the Atlanta Police Department, is present. He's currently in the family lounge, awaiting us." "Police?" Marcus inquired, his voice flat with shock. "Indeed," Dr. Imani confirmed. "Your assertions during the 911 call, specifically mentioning your wife was confined to a room and held captive, coupled with the extreme nature of her injuries, automatically necessitated a formal report from our institution. The hospital has officially registered this incident as a potential criminal inquiry." The double doors leading to the main reception area swung open, heralding the arrival of Doris and Chloe. They were still adorned in their lavish wedding ensembles. Chloe was resplendent in her $50,000 gown, now showing signs of slight disarray, while Doris sported her bespoke silk suit complemented by diamond adornments. They appeared strikingly out of place within the sterile, hushed surroundings, much like exotic avians that had inadvertently ventured into a deep freeze. They located Marcus immediately, standing rigidly beside a tall gentleman in a dark suit who was leaning in, conversing in hushed tones. The man bore a badge affixed to his belt. "Detective Hayes." Doris halted abruptly, her eyes widening perceptibly as she recognized the official demeanor. Chloe, meanwhile, looked both bewildered and displeased. Marcus turned his head, his expression utterly devoid of any discernible emotion, his gaze fixed upon his mother. Detective Hayes concluded his remarks to Marcus and then addressed Doris and Chloe. "Mrs. Henderson. Miss Henderson." Doris hurried forward, her facade of composure completely disintegrating, replaced by an overwhelming wave of raw apprehension. "Detective," she began, her voice already faltering, "I am profoundly sorry for any misunderstanding. My son has endured a most distressing ordeal. He must have misspoken during his call." Detective Hayes, disregarding her interjection, addressed Marcus with measured calm. "Sir, based upon your own recorded statement during..." The 911 call and the clinical observations from the emergency room medical staff, we have grounds to suspect that your wife was unlawfully detained by a member of your family. We are formally initiating an investigation. Doris's breath hitched. She spun back to Marcus, grasping his arms with such force that her fingernails dug into his flesh. Marcus, stop them. Tell them. It was a misunderstanding. I only secured the door because I believed she was experiencing a panic attack. I thought she required rest. McKenna mentioned she was in labor and needed medical attention. Marcus stated, his voice utterly monotone. He did not pull away, but his gaze remained steadfast. I was unaware it was actual labor. Doris shrieked, her eyes darting desperately between Marcus and the detective. She was 6 weeks premature. Who could have possibly foreseen that? Who would have guessed? I merely instructed her to delay for a short while, to avoid overshadowing Chloe's moment. I assumed she was being overly dramatic. Everyone knows McKenna is prone to exaggeration. She wrung her hands. I had no idea it was genuine. I truly didn't. I swear it, you must believe me. I did not anticipate she would actually go into labor. Chloe, meanwhile, directed her attention toward the detective, her annoyance resurfacing. This is preposterous. All this fuss over a simple misunderstanding. Mother was merely attempting to safeguard the ceremony. It's hardly a criminal offense. We are led to believe your wife was being dramatic. Doris continued, her voice gaining a desperate intensity. She always amplifies situations far beyond their actual severity. I simply advised her to compose herself and relax. Who could have possibly anticipated the baby was arriving? I didn't know. I swear it, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. You must believe me, please. She looked directly at Detective Hayes, imploring him to restore her flawless image. You have to believe me. My sole desire was for my daughter's day to be perfect. That is all. The jarring transition from the icy darkness of unconsciousness back to the searing white of the hospital room was utterly brutal. McKenna's eyes snapped open instantly, assaulted by the piercing light, the steady beeping of the monitors, and the dull, persistent ache resonating through her body. Tubes snaked into her arm. Her abdomen felt heavy and taut from the emergency cesarean section. The initial thought that registered was not the pain, but the profound silence. Where was her infant? She attempted to speak, to question the nurse who was diligently monitoring her vital signs, but only a weak, dry rasp escaped her lips. A figure swam into her field of vision. It was Doris. Her elaborate wedding attire was rumpled. Her makeup was smudged, yet the diamonds still glinted under the light. Upon noticing McKenna's eyelids fluttering open, Doris bypassed both the nurse and the police officer, rushing directly to the bedside. "Maka," Doris whispered, her voice high-pitched and laced with desperation, grasping McKenna's hand. "Oh, my darling, thank heavens you're awake. Listen to me, I implore you, you must listen." Doris leaned in, her voice frantic, thick with the acrid scent of fear. "Tell them it was a mistake. Inform the police you misunderstood. I had no intention of causing you harm. I was unaware you would go into labor. You must tell them you have no intention of pressing charges. Please, do not initiate legal action against me. Do not inflict this upon our family. You cannot do this to Marcus." She was pleading. The once formidable Doris was reduced to a pathetic, desperate woman begging for the preservation of her reputation. "Consider the scandal. You cannot utterly devastate us. Marcus will never absolve you if you tarnish the family name with this absurd criminal accusation. Please, McKenna, my love, utter a single word. State that it was an accident. Say that you forgive me." McKenna stared up at the woman who had confined her to a room while she was bleeding. She longed to scream. She yearned to disclose everything to the police officer, but her throat was too parched, her body too broken. She found herself without words. She could only gaze at Doris with wide, vacant eyes. Her silence served as a profound, unyielding rejection. Doris misinterpreted this silence as weakness, as acquiescence. She tightened her grip on McKenna's hand, her diamonds digging painfully into McKenna's skin. "Thank you, my dear. I knew you would be understanding." She released McKenna's hand and spun around, spotting Marcus standing like a stone effigy in the doorway, accompanied by Officer Hayes. "Marcus!" she demanded, her voice regaining a flicker of its former authority. "Inform the officer. Tell him your wife is recuperating and that this matter is resolved. Instruct him to dismiss the charges. This is a domestic concern. We will handle it internally." "That's precisely right," Chloe chirped, entering the room behind Marcus. "Mother simply needs to procure a more luxurious crib for her, and this will all be concluded. Tell them, Marcus, tell them to depart." Doris fixed her gaze upon Marcus, willing him to assert control, to halt the investigation, to restore the false tranquility of their family. "Tell them, Marcus, this is your opportunity. We will resolve this internally." The recovery area felt cramped and suffocatingly quiet, despite the presence of 6 individuals crammed within. The harsh fluorescent hospital lighting glinted off Chloe's $50,000 wedding gown and the ostentatious diamonds weighing down Doris's wrists. McKenna lay at the heart of the disarray, her skin starkly pale against the white linens, her eyes open and lucid, observing each of them. Officer Hayes stood near the foot of the bed, his presence a stark, unwavering reminder of the pending accusations. Doris stood closest to the bed, her face swollen and streaked with meticulously applied tears. She avoided looking at McKenna, instead directing her desperate gaze toward Marcus, who stood by the window, his shoulders rigidly set. "Marcus, please look at me," Doris implored, wringing her hands. "My dear, I have been under immense strain. I was utterly depleted from orchestrating this entire wedding. I was simply overwhelmed with stress." She lowered her voice to a dramatically pleading whisper. "My only transgression was wanting everything to be perfect. Stress and a pursuit of perfection. You understand, I care for McKenna. I never intended any genuine harm. I was merely overly protective of Chloe's special day." Chloe's husband Thomas leaned against the wall, his tuxedo jacket creased. He appeared not concerned about McKenna, but incensed about his disrupted wedding celebration. Chloe stood beside him, her bridal veil discarded, her arms crossed defiantly, glaring at McKenna. Doris continued her monologue, performing solely for the benefit of the police officer and Thomas. "Please, Marcus, my child, you must inform them that this is settled. I am merely her mother. I was endeavoring to shield our family from an embarrassing spectacle. I was concerned the pregnancy-related stress had rendered her hysterical. I erred, yes, but not in a manner that constitutes a criminal act. I have already endured sufficient hardship." Marcus remained silent for a prolonged, agonizing interval, allowing his mother's manipulative pronouncements to fill the room, letting the sheer desperation of the situation permeate McKenna's consciousness. He glanced down at his wife, whose strength was already visibly returning to her eyes. He finally pushed himself away from the windowsill and slowly approached the center of the room. Every gaze followed him. He looked directly at Officer Hayes. "My wife will not be pursuing charges against my mother," Marcus stated, his voice clear and devoid of any emotion. Doris gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes instantly alight with triumphant relief. A small, cruel smile began to form on Chloe's lips. "Oh, thank you, my son," Doris cried, rushing forward and attempting to embrace him. "I knew it. I knew she was reasonable. I knew she was a good wife. I knew she'd be understanding. She is always the sensible one. We can rectify this now. We can put this unpleasant episode behind us." Doris surged forward, her hands reaching for Marcus. her eyes shining with triumphant tears. "I knew it," she cried, attempting to hug him. "I knew she wouldn't tarnish the family's reputation." "You see, Officer Hayes, it's settled. McKenna is a sensible woman. This is a private family matter." Marcus deftly sidestepped her embrace, his tuxedo jacket rustling. His face remained a mask of cold, unyielding determination. He did not look at Doris. He looked at the police officer, Detective Hayes. "My wife is recuperating, Detective," Marcus stated, his voice flat and authoritative, cutting through Doris's prattle, "and she is not pressing charges." He paused, allowing the silence to descend. "Because I am." Doris froze mid-stride. The air seemed to drain from her lungs. Her expression, smug with relief, mere moments ago crumbled into dust. Chloe, observing from nearby, let out a choked gasp. "I am pressing charges," Marcus repeated, looking now at his mother. "Against my mother, Doris Henderson. Officer, I wish for her to be charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and aggravated assault upon my pregnant wife, and for contributing to the severe endangerment of my son." Doris staggered backward, clutching her chest. Her eyes were wide with terror, her arrogance finally overwhelmed. "Marcus, you are insane. You are hysterical. What are you talking about? You have no proof. That is merely the word of an overwrought woman against mine." "You desire proof, mother?" Marcus inquired, reaching deep into his tuxedo pocket. He produced a small black USB drive. He held it aloft between his thumb and forefinger, a minuscule, devastating instrument. "Do you recall the security system your father installed? The one he never disclosed to you? The one that records every major area of this residence, including the bridal suite." Doris's face drained to a sickening, terrifying shade of white. "I possess the footage." "Mother," Marcus continued, his voice utterly devoid of emotion, "I have the complete recording. I have the audio. I have the video of you confiscating her phone. I have the visual evidence of you forcibly shoving her into that bathroom." He looked at Detective Hayes. "I have my mother's voice explicitly stating that she was compelling my wife to delay childbirth so as not to disrupt Chloe's celebration. I have the audio of my wife screaming and pounding on the door. And I have my mother's composed voice informing Chloe that Macaw merely required rest while she was hemorrhaging on the floor. It is all here, Detective. Every moment of kidnapping and reckless endangerment meticulously documented by the man she so desperately sought to impress." Chloe emitted a high-pitched, raw shriek that sliced through the stillness of the recovery room. Her cry was not a defense of her mother, but a scream for herself. "What is that?" she shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth, her perfect wedding dress suddenly appearing cheap and unsuitable. "You cannot possess that. That is fabricated. It must be fake." Thomas, Chloe's newly wedded husband, who had been leaning against the wall, sprang to attention. He did not look at Marcus. He looked at Chloe, his eyes widening with pure, cold comprehension. "You are aware of this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Chloe, tell me you were not aware of this. Tell me you did not know she was confined in there." Chloe stammered frantically, desperately attempting to construct a narrative that would salvage her idyllic existence. I didn't. I had no idea. I assumed Mother was jesting. I thought Macaw was simply throwing a tantrum. I swear it, Thomas, I truly believed it was a joke." Her denial was feeble, transparent. The memory of her laughter echoing outside the bathroom door still resounded in Mekina's ears. Doris, witnessing her final recourse crumble, launched into a last desperate maneuver of emotional combat, completely disregarding the police officer. "Marcus!" she wailed, staggering forward and seizing his arm. "You cannot do this to your mother. I am your flesh and blood. You cannot consign your mother to prison. This family has dedicated decades to constructing this name. You are going to annihilate us all for some clumsy girl who couldn't even deliver her baby properly." She pounded his chest with her fist, the force barely registering on his frame. "I love you. I love your sister. You cannot permit your wife, who has already ruined Chloe's day, to obliterate the entire Henderson legacy. You cannot." Marcus remained an unyielding pillar, allowing his mother's fury to wash over him. He then grasped both of her wrists and applied pressure. "You ruined it, Mother. You did not merely spoil a party. You violated the law. You jeopardized the lives of my wife and my son for a photograph opportunity with the Thorntons. You prioritized your image over your family's lives." He shoved her hands away, stepping back to allow the police officer to easily intervene. "You are no longer my family's priority, Mother. My wife is my family. My son is my family. And you forfeited them when you turned that key. You are not protecting us. You are safeguarding your vanity." "But Marcus," Doris screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I am your mother. You cannot abandon your own mother. You abandoned Makar, Mother," Marcus stated, his voice flat, devoid of the affection and warmth she craved. "You destroyed it the moment you locked that door. You broke the law, and now you will face the repercussions." Chloe lunged forward, attempting to block Marcus from reaching the police officer. Her eyes were wide and frantic. Her $50,000 wedding gown now resembled a crumpled prison uniform. "Marcus, please do not do this." "Think," she screamed. "The wedding, the insurance, the Thorntons, our future. You cannot let her ruin everything because you are angry. You must halt this. You must preserve the family name." Marcus looked at his sister, his gaze cold and utterly unmoved. "You wish to discuss preserving the family name, Chloe? You wish to speak of the Thorntons and the family legacy. You wish to discuss appearances." He dismissed her plea with a sharp, brutal shake of his head. "You are as culpable as Mother. You both opted for optics over Makina's life. Now move." He gently pushed Chloe aside, his focus settling entirely on his mother, who was still leaning against the wall, attempting to deny the reality of the USB drive. "You were always concerned with the legacy, Mother," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conversational yet chilling tone. "You always worried about who held the reins of the Henderson family name and its wealth. You spent decades telling me I was merely a simple surgeon, a naive doctor who was too preoccupied with saving lives to comprehend true business." He stepped closer to her. "You believed you were the one in control. You hosted the gatherings. You managed the portfolio. You squandered Father's wealth as if it were your inherent right. All in the name of upholding the Henderson name. It was my prerogative," Doris insisted, her voice trembling but defiant. "It was the legacy Father and I constructed. You were too busy operating to grasp finances. Did you ever question why Father selected me, the simple surgeon, to serve as the sole trustee of the entire family fortune?" Marcus inquired, letting the question linger heavily in the air. "Did you ever truly ponder why your late husband, the man whose image you revere, structured his will to grant me complete discretionary authority over every single asset that funds your extravagant allowance, rather than bequeathing it to you, his capable, business-savvy wife?" Doris's eyes darted frantically, her breathing shallow and ragged. The question was a poison she had long avoided. "Father understood your nature, Mother," Marcus continued relentlessly. "He recognized your obsession with status, and appearances would ultimately consume you. He knew you would sacrifice anyone and anything to ascend that social ladder. He knew you would prioritize the validation of the Thorntons over the lives of his own grandchildren. He entirely excluded you from control, Mother, because you are a liability, not a leader. That is a fabrication." Doris gasped, pressing her hands against her temples. "That is a lie. He trusted me. He loved me. He trusted me, Marcus corrected. And today, your avarice, your obsession, your decision to confine my wife in a bathroom has validated every single safeguard he implemented. Doris appeared utterly destabilized, her manicured fingers flying to her throat. She fought desperately to grasp any semblance of the reality she had so meticulously constructed. No, she insisted, shaking her head violently. That is not how the Henderson Family Trust operates. It is communal property. It is shared. Your father and I reached an agreement on the terms years ago. He entrusted me to manage the estate. He entrusted me to safeguard the legacy. She looked frantically at Chloe and Thomas, seeking affirmation. He trusted me. Marcus did not raise his voice. He maintained a low, surgical tone. Incorrect, Mother. It is not communal property. It is not shared. The trust is irrevocable and it is registered in my name. I am the sole trustee. You are legally merely a salaried beneficiary. A salaried beneficiary? Doris repeated the words, tasting like ash. That is preposterous. I am the matriarch. I host these events. I am the face of the family. And that, Marcus revealed, his voice a hammer blow, is precisely why Father removed you from control. He recognized your fixation with status. He observed how profoundly you dreaded being perceived as anything less than perfect. He knew you would squander the true wealth on lavish weddings, on parties for politicians, and on $5,000 handbags. He knew you would trade the family's financial stability merely to preserve a social facade. Marcus stepped closer, compelling her to confront the man she had so readily dismissed. He understood that your vanity would be our collective downfall. He trusted me, the physician, because he knew I would prioritize the family's enduring prosperity over your ego. Doris attempted to deny it, but her voice emerged as a thin, panicked whisper. That is a lie. I built this life. I earned this. You earned his distrust, Marcus stated simply, and you earned the consequences that accompany it. You just inquired why I am present. This is my purpose, to fulfill my father's directive. He looked directly at Detective Hayes, then back at his mother. Mother, you consistently prioritized image over inconvenience. You prioritized a celebration over the life of your grandchild, and now you will finally comprehend the true cost of that decision. He retrieved his personal phone, tapping the screen once to display the account information. I contacted the family attorney and the financial manager 10 minutes ago. Given that you utilized your corporate credit cards to finance a personal wedding of this magnitude, all of which is technically managed by the Henderson Trust, under my administration, I have invoked the moral turpitude clause. Doris's eyes bulged. Your salary has been immediately suspended. Your credit cards have been deactivated. Your bank accounts linked to the trust have been frozen, pending a comprehensive audit of the past 3 years. You possess zero purchasing power remaining, Mother. You are instantly destitute. You have no resources to secure legal counsel to contest me. You have no funds left to cover your bail. You are powerless. Doris stood immobile, her eyes wide, staring at Marcus's calm, resolute countenance. The colour vanished completely from her complexion, rendering her the exact visual embodiment that had been teased. The sheer horror of being instantaneously stripped of her entire fortune and authority was a far more crushing blow than any threat of incarceration. She attempted to vocalize, but only a desiccated, rasping gasp emerged from her windpipe. The esteemed matriarch of the Henderson lineage, the undisputed social luminary of Buckhead, had been utterly decimated financially. Marcus redirected his frigid gaze from his maternal figure to his sibling, Chloe, who was already spiraling into a state of acute respiratory distress. He possessed one final annihilating truth to impart. You wish to discuss the nuptials, Chloe? Very well. Let us convene on the subject of the wedding. Marcus's tone was lethally soft, the wedding costing $500,000, the gown priced at $50,000, the private chartered aircraft secured for the honeymoon excursion to Bora Bora. Chloe appeared utterly disoriented, clinging to Thomas's arm. Marcus, those expenditures have already been settled. Mother remitted the final installments last week. She procured them utilizing her corporate credit line and post-dated checks, drawn against accounts that I now command, Marcus interjected. The very accounts I have just rendered inaccessible, the accounts I have just terminated. Congratulations on your union, Chloe. However, your honeymoon is rescinded. Your service providers will receive no remuneration, and your entire meticulously crafted wedding celebration is poised to unravel publicly the moment the financial institutions commence their inquiries. Chloe stared at him, her disbelief dissolving into unadulterated primal terror. No, you cannot. That is not equitable. You are powerless to inflict this upon me. My existence, my public persona. Thomas, Chloe's newly minted spouse, finally articulated, his voice laced with palpable animosity. He averted his gaze from Machina and Doris, fixing his glare solely upon Chloe. You deceived me, he hissed. You misrepresented your financial standing. You fabricated your mother's control. You imperiled my professional standing for a mere 5-hour feat. He released her arm and retreated, his own career trajectory imploding around him. The escalating pandemonium reached its apex. Doris emitted a strangled, desperate exhalation that was a hybrid of a sob and a shriek, her knees faltering. She was utterly spent. Abandoning any pretense of dignified matriarchal composure, she simply dissolved. She collapsed onto the sterile linoleum of the hospital floor, her physical form incapable of withstanding the concurrent shock of her son's perfidy and her absolute financial annihilation. Officer Hayes advanced with immediate alacrity, his posture transitioning from passive observation to decisive action. He placed his hand with firm resolve upon Marcus's shoulder. Dr. Henderson, your cooperation and the submitted evidence are deeply appreciated. Detective Hayes awaits the file. And concerning your mother, he directed his gaze downward at the disgraced woman prostrate on the floor. Mrs. Doris Henderson, you are now under arrest for felony kidnapping and reckless endangerment. We will require paramedics to facilitate your transport. The law enforcement officer delivered the final devastating pronouncement. You are Doris Henderson, a prisoner. The sheer shock of the arrest, administered precisely within the sterile confines of the hospital room, marked merely the genesis of Doris's downfall. Officer Hayes and the attending nurse were compelled to physically extricate the distraught woman from the floor. She was conveyed not to an opulent spa, but to the Fulton County Detention Center. The news erupted with the force of a tsunami. The very subsequent morning, the prominent headline emblazoned across the digital pages of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution proclaimed in bold typography, Buckhead matriarch apprehended for felony. Kidnapping following confinement of pregnant daughter-in-law in restroom. The entire charade of the flawless Henderson family imploded within mere hours. The video documentation that Marcus had meticulously compiled proved to be the singular most potent instrument against Doris. Her high-powered, swiftly retained legal counsel meticulously reviewed the footage and immediately recommended the sole viable legal recourse short of a plea agreement. The video evidence was irrefutable. It depicted not a maternal moment of fleeting distress, but a deliberate, premeditated act of confinement propelled by selfish vanity. The prosecutor's office, acutely aware of the high-profile media attention and the blatant moral turpitude inherent in the act, was prepared to proceed with charges of felony kidnapping and aggravated assault. They perceived an opportunity. Doris, consumed by dread of a public trial, and the potential for actual imprisonment, which would irrevocably shatter her social standing, contested the decision. Her attorney, however, remained unyielding. He underscored that the video contained her voice, calmly uttering falsehoods to Chloe while McCaw was audibly in agony and bleeding. He persuaded her that the sole avenue for mitigating the disaster was to circumvent a jury trial, where the complete, unedited footage would be exhibited repeatedly to the world. She reluctantly assented to a plea negotiation. The charges were subsequently reduced to reckless endangerment and unlawful confinement. The imposed sentence constituted a swift, brutal dismantling of her social existence. Doris Henderson, the reigning queen of society, was condemned to 2 years of probationary supervision. She was mandated to complete 500 hours of court-ordered community service, thereby ensuring her engagement in manual labour for the very public she had ardently sought to impress. Most mortifyingly, she was directed to undergo compulsory psychological evaluation and therapy to address her narcissistic and controlling disposition. The true reprisal, however, was social. The very same echelon of society that had eagerly solicited her invitations now recoiled in profound dismay. Her name was expunged from the prestigious Atlanta Arts Council's roster. Her affiliations with the most exclusive country clubs were discreetly rescinded. The Society Chronicles, which had once meticulously documented her every flawless gala, now dedicated entire columns to the salacious intricacies of her apprehension and sentencing. Her erstwhile companions and peers perceived her not as the elegant matriarch, but as a convicted wrongdoer who had jeopardized her own grandchild for the sake of a celebratory event. The penalty was not predicated on the avoidance of incarceration. It was rooted in the complete, irreparable devastation of the sole asset Doris held dear, her image. The Henderson surname ceased to signify elite standing. It became emblematic of malignant cruelty and public disgrace. The Thornton family's response to the unfolding disgrace was swift, dispassionate, and exclusively focused on safeguarding their own political reputation. Appalled by Doris's public arrest and the news that the final wedding disbursements were being dishonoured due to Marcus's intervention, they promptly compelled their son to nullify the marital union. From their perspective, the wedding represented a failed business transaction, and Chloe was an egregious liability. They denounced it as a union founded on deceit and deployed their extensive legal apparatus to dissolve the marriage. Chloe's newly acquired standing and position within the Thornton dynasty evaporated overnight. The subsequent financial collapse was total. Chloe's vendors, incensed by the bouncing checks and the public scandal, began demanding restitution, with some issuing threats of legal action. Devoid of Doris's unending financial deluge to obscure the repercussions, Chloe was exposed as possessing minimal personal wealth. Her $50,000 wedding gown was repossessed by the establishment. The Bora Bora honeymoon was cancelled, the reimbursement seized by creditors. She had subsisted entirely on the illusion and the anticipation of affluence provided by her mother. Now, that affluence was negligible, managed exclusively by Marcus, who afforded his mother only a meagre, strictly controlled monthly stipend. Chloe was compelled to vacate the opulent new residence she had shared with her former spouse and relocate to a modest apartment. Her carefully constructed persona as a lifestyle influencer was utterly obliterated. Her followers, who cherished the illusion of seamless perfection, abandoned her in droves as her online feed inevitably began to reflect genuine distress and a scarcity of designer accoutrements. She attempted a pivot, seeking to leverage the scandal for attention, but the public perceived her as a villain who had revelled while her sister-in-law was confined to a lavatory. Her comment sections devolved into a toxic mire. The high society circles she had diligently strived to penetrate abruptly turned their backs. The Atlanta social scene offered no forgiveness to individuals who disrupted prestigious wedding celebrations or those who were publicly revealed to be impoverished. Chloe, the favored child who had thrived on adoration, became a social pariah, severed from the very individuals whose approval she craved. Marcus's execution of his late father's directive was cold, precise, and absolute. As the sole discretionary trustee of the Henderson family's considerable assets, he wielded the power of life and ruin over his maternal figure, and he did not hesitate to exercise it. Doris's financial prerogatives were not merely curtailed, they were systematically dismantled. Marcus did not render her destitute, as he provided a sufficient monthly allowance to cover essential living expenses, sustenance, utilities, and minor necessities. However, the sum was a mere fraction of her former accustomed expenditures, adequate for survival, but entirely insufficient to sustain the facade of high society status. The shock of her reduced income level proved catastrophic. Her annual membership dues for the Atlanta Arts Council and her exclusive country club went unpaid. The expense of maintaining the sprawling Buckhead mansion, with its meticulously manicured grounds and substantial utility costs, rapidly became unmanageable. She could no longer afford the staff, the household manager, the weekly cleaning crew, or the gardeners, all indispensable components of her carefully constructed public image. The mansion, the very emblem of her achievements and control, swiftly transformed into a financial prison she could not sustain. She resisted the inevitable for months, making frantic calls to legal professionals and financial advisors, only to be repeatedly informed that Marcus's dominion over the trust was unassailable. Her husband, Marcus's father, had meticulously drafted the trust to preclude any avenues for ostentation. Finally, and with profound humiliation, she was compelled to list the Buckhead estate for sale. The transaction became an open secret within Atlanta's social circles, a visible, tangible testament to her downfall. She divested the mansion not merely to subsist, but to escape the burden of its upkeep and the shame of its conspicuousness. Doris relocated to a modest two-bedroom apartment far removed from the exclusive postal codes she had once governed. She exchanged her custom-built German SUV for a utilitarian sedan. Her existence became confined, ordinary, and entirely imperceptible to the social circles she had formerly commanded. The ultimate chastisement was the forfeiture of her audience. She had dedicated a lifetime to performance, and now the stage was vacant. The most profound loss was the irreparable damage to her relationship with Marcus. He maintained a respectful distance, ensuring her legal and basic financial necessities were met, but nothing more. The warmth, affection, and deference she craved had vanished, supplanted by a surgeon's clinical assessment of her as a liability. She was the individual who had jeopardized his wife and son for the sake of a cocktail party. Marcus harbored no animosity towards her. He simply removed her from his life. Doris forfeited everything she deemed significant: her elevated social standing, her financial dominion, the symbol of her authority, and the esteem of her brilliant son. She was left solely with her regrets, and the stark realization that the pursuit of flawlessness had exacted a devastating toll, costing her the very family she claimed to safeguard. Her ambition had ultimately led to her undoing. Her punishment was absolute: 6 months. 6 months of trepidation, recovery, and quiet, resolute healing. The journey was arduous, but the moment finally arrived. McKenna stood in the sterile quiet of Northside Niku, attired not in a hospital smock, but in a comfortable, earth-toned knit dress, her eyes shining with unshed tears of profound relief. Marcus stood beside her, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder, his gaze fixated on the small plastic bassinet. Their son, Elijah, was being carefully swaddled by the head nurse for his final departure. Elijah, a name signifying "My God is Jehovah," felt like a promise fulfilled. He was no longer a fragile, premature infant fighting for each breath. He was a robust, healthy 6-month-old boy, ready to return home. McKenna's recovery paralleled Elijah's slow, painstaking, yet complete recuperation. The physical trauma from the abruption and the emergency surgery had receded. The scar from the cesarean section was a faint, white line, a permanent mark of the battle she had triumphed over. More significantly, the psychological wound of abandonment had begun to mend. Marcus's unwavering support throughout the legal proceedings and Elijah's hospitalization had served as her anchor. He was no longer the indecisive man who prioritized his mother's approval. He had evolved into a father, a husband, and a protector. The nurse entrusted Elijah to McKenna's care. The delicate weight of her son, warm and tangible in her arms, was the most precious, most profound sensation she had ever experienced. It was the ultimate, undeniable reward. The drive away from the hospital was silent, yet peaceful. They were not returning to the imposing, oppressive grandeur of the Buckhead mansion. They were proceeding to a new address, a dwelling they had selected collaboratively. Their new home was contemporary and bathed in natural light, perched on a tranquil hillside overlooking the city. It was constructed with clean lines and warm wood, designed for comfort and living, rather than for hosting political gatherings and impressing dignitaries. The stark white and cold marble of Doris's world were absent, replaced by soft, inviting textures and McKenna's own vibrant collection of African art. McKenna entered the foyer, the gentle hum of the house enveloping her like a warm embrace. She felt healthy, robust, and entirely unburdened. The oppressive silence that had once haunted her previous existence had dissipated, replaced by the serene quietude of a home founded on truth. Marcus approached from behind, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Welcome home, McKenna," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home, Elijah." McKenna turned, leaning into her husband's reassuring strength. "It's perfect, Marcus," she said, surveying the bright, open space. "It is entirely, wonderfully ours." She had not only reclaimed her life, but had meticulously constructed a superior one, brick by determined brick, liberated from the shadow of the Henderson matriarch. The future felt not flawless, but authentic and secure. The concluding element of Marcus's personal transformation involved the family legacy itself. One quiet evening, after settling Elijah into his crib in their new sun-drenched residence, Marcus invited McKenna to join him in the living room. He did not commence with the apologies he had already offered innumerable times. He began with a decisive action. "I listed the Buckhead house this week," Marcus stated, simply taking her hand. "The mansion, it was finalized this afternoon." McKenna felt a wave of profound relief wash over her. That house, the symbol of Doris's absolute authority and their years of subjugation, held far too many somber memories. "Thank you, Marcus," she replied. "That house harbored too many distressing recollections. It never truly felt like home anyway." Marcus nodded grimly. "It was never ours. It was Mother's stage for her performance, and I am finished subsidizing her drama." The divestment of the tangible emblem of the Henderson inheritance was the indispensable initial step. The subsequent action involved investment. Marcus then elaborated on the utilization of the remaining capital from the sale, which he, as the sole trustee, now exclusively controlled. "I have liquidated Father's underperforming assets and restructured the portfolio, and I intend to execute something that should have been accomplished 2 years ago." McKenna regarded him with curiosity. "I transferred $5 million into a new account this morning." Marcus announced, carefully observing her reaction. It's the foundational capital for your enterprise, your medtech startup. It is entirely yours, completely unencumbered, fully funded, and under your complete jurisdiction. McKenna gasped, withdrawing her hand in astonishment. $5 million, Marcus? That's inconceivable. That's the core fund. No, he corrected, his voice firm. That is the profit generated from the core fund, and you are the most capable individual I know to manage it. You are brilliant, McKenna. You developed that business plan while pregnant and simultaneously managing a full-time position. You accomplished all of that with Mother constantly asserting it was merely a pastime. She disparaged the very concept of an app. Well, now that app possesses $5 million in capital to ascend to its rightful position as an industry leader. He rose and knelt before her, his hands resting gently on her knees. This was his genuine confession, his most profound apology. I should have undertaken this much earlier. I should have confronted my mother then. I should have invested in you and defended you before the entire family. My silence constituted a betrayal. Carr, and I am profoundly sorry for that. My existence was simpler when I permitted her to dictate affairs. McKenna reached down, her fingers brushing his face. His sincerity was palpable. You no longer need to apologize, Marcus. You jeopardized your career and your mother's legacy to safeguard me and Elijah. That is all the apology I require. No, he insisted, shaking his head. My role as your husband commences now. Truly, my responsibility is to protect you and to empower you. And I want you to understand this. I am not merely financing your venture. I am investing entirely in you. I want you to utilize that $5 million and construct an empire. Demonstrate to them precisely what they attempted to demolish. Exhibit to them what genuine fortitude embodies. He looked up at her, his eyes alight with a love that was finally entirely liberated from his mother's influence. I will invest in you from this point forward, in every conceivable sense of the word. The office space was magnificent. It occupied a gleaming corner suite offering panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline, its walls entirely constructed of glass. This was not the cramped, borrowed workspace where McKenna had initially sketched out her business plan. This was the headquarters of a flourishing medtech enterprise. The room thrummed with the low, focused energy of a burgeoning, successful firm. McKenna was seated at her custom-designed desk, not in the tailored austerity of a suit, but in comfortable attire, reviewing financial projections that indicated exponential growth. Adjacent to her desk, near a large window where sunlight streamed in, stood a sleek, contemporary bassinet. Within it, Elijah, 6 months old, slept soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The sight of her son, healthy and strong, served as McKenna's constant, quiet reminder of the miracle she had fought to preserve. The door opened softly and Marcus entered. He appeared entirely transformed. Gone were the rigid shoulders and the strained expression of the overworked surgeon beholden to his mother's expectations. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and carried 2 mugs. He was relaxed, focused, and present. He was her true partner. He placed a mug of coffee on her desk and leaned down to gently kiss Elijah's forehead before settling into the chair opposite her. The updates from the legal team are conclusive, he stated. Doris settled her bond yesterday, and the most significant development— What is it? McKenna inquired, looking up from her tablet. The meeting with the investment consortium in Silicon Valley has been confirmed for next week. They have reviewed our projections and are profoundly impressed with your technology. McKenna smiled, a look of quiet triumph gracing her features. My technology? She queried. You mean? Marcus shook his head instantly. No, I mean our technology. I am the Chief Medical Officer. Remember, my input is critical. He grinned. The Silicon Valley delegation specifically noted that our partnership, the amalgamation of clinical expertise and marketing innovation, is what defines the uniqueness of our business model. They expressed their eagerness to invest. McKenna laughed, her voice light and genuine. Eager to invest in the app Mother deemed a mere hobby. Marcus reached across the desk, covering her hand with his own. They are eager to invest in the strength and resilience of the woman who conceived it. They are investing in you, McKenna, in your resilience. McKenna gazed at her hands, then at her husband, and finally at Elijah. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the immense significance of her victory, a triumph not of retribution but of life itself, to fully register. She had confronted Doris's toxic definition of family and status and had prevailed on every conceivable front, legal, financial, and maternal. Her victory resided in standing there, basking in the sunlight, holding the hand of the man who had finally chosen her and listening to the soft breaths of the son she had rescued. She possessed everything: a thriving enterprise built upon her own ingenuity, a husband who was now genuinely supportive, and a healthy child who represented a pristine new legacy. Her narrative was not defined by the trauma she endured. It was characterized by the empire she constructed from the remnants of its wreckage. She had won. The core takeaway from this account is that genuine worth is established by one's inner conviction rather than external opinions. McKenna's experience emphasizes how destructive family dynamics flourish by perpetuating a manufactured reality of dominance and deficiency. When confronted with profound disloyalty, the most potent reaction is not to plead for acceptance, but to construct an entirely new, more robust foundation. Vindication isn't solely found in the retribution of wrongdoers, but in the fiscal and psychological freedom gained by rejecting subjugation. Marcus's shift in perspective illuminates that passive agreement is a form of treachery. Authentic affection demands proactive protection and enablement. The highest form of riches is self-governance. Disseminate this narrative if you subscribe to the notion that clear limits are the bedrock of regard.